Excuse me? You just walked right into that lady and didn't even say sorry. That's no home training.
The street went silent the moment he stepped out of the black car. Not gradually, not slowly, all at once, like someone had reached into the world and turned off the volume. A vendor who'd been arguing loudly about change suddenly forgot what money was. A group of teenagers near the corner, the loud kind, the kind who are never not talking, looked up, looked at the man, and looked away so fast you'd have thought they'd touched a live wire. Two construction workers, big men, arms like dock rope, stepped aside without being asked, without thinking, like their bodies made the decision before their brains got the memo. Nobody said a word. The man walked like silence was something he owned. He wasn't particularly large, average height, clean cut, dark wool coat, no tie, hands in his pockets. His face was completely unreadable, not angry, not cold, just settled, like a man who had, long ago, stopped being surprised by anything the world might throw at him. His eyes were the color of deep water. He moved through the outdoor stretch of Pike Place Market, normally the loudest, most alive place in downtown Seattle, fish flying through the air, tourists laughing, vendors calling out, like he was walking through a museum after hours. And not a single adult said one word to him. But here's what nobody expected. A voice sliced clean through that silence, sharp, confident, completely unbothered.
Excuse me, you just walked right into that lady and didn't even say sorry. That's no home training.
Every adult froze. The voice belonged to a boy. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old, small but solid, with a face full of freckles and a dark blue winter jacket that was slightly too big for him, sleeves rolled up twice at the wrist. He had a paper bag of roasted chestnuts in one hand and an expression of pure, uncomplicated moral indignation on his face. He was pointing directly at the man, that man. And he did not look afraid, not even a little bit. He looked annoyed. The man stopped walking. He turned. Slowly. The world held its breath. Here's the thing about moments like this. They look small from the outside. Just a boy, just a crowded market, just a Saturday morning. But some moments are like icebergs. What you can see is almost nothing compared to what's underneath. Nobody on that street could have known this was one of those moments. Nobody except, perhaps, the man himself. Because something happened to his face. It was fast, a single second, maybe less, and then it was gone, locked back behind that stone-still calm. But for just a heartbeat, something moved behind those deep water eyes when he looked at that small, freckled boy with his chestnuts and his borrowed phrase. Something that looked almost like recognition. The boy's name was Marcus Cole, 8 years old, 3rd grade at East Lake Elementary, future marine biologist. He would tell you this himself, unprompted, within 4 minutes of meeting you. He had strong opinions about breakfast foods, a moral code so precise it regularly exhausted the adults around him, and absolutely zero sense of when to be afraid of powerful people. That last part is important. He lived with his mother, Grace Cole, 6 blocks from the market. Grace was a nursing assistant at Seattle General, days on the ward, evenings doing in-home care for an elderly couple on Queen Anne Hill. She was 32 years old with the kind of tired that lives in the bone, not the face. The kind of tired that doesn't stop her from tucking a handwritten note under Marcus's sandwich every single morning. Every day, without fail. She had raised Marcus alone. His father had been gone since Marcus was 2, not violently, not dramatically, just gone. Grace never spoke badly about him. She simply said, when Marcus asked, "He had to go somewhere, baby. It wasn't about you." Marcus had accepted this the way children accept things they don't fully understand, not happily, but completely. He filed it away and kept moving. He was, in every sense that mattered, a remarkable kid. Not because he was top of his class, his math teacher might push back gently on that characterization, but because he had something rarer than grades. He saw people clearly, Without the fog of what he was supposed to think or feel, Marcus just looked at the world and told it the truth. Which is exactly why when the enormous crowd parted for the man in the dork coat, and the man walked right through without even glancing at the elderly woman with the grocery bag he'd sent sideways, Marcus spoke. He didn't think, didn't weigh the room, didn't register the silence, the fear, the invisible current of authority radiating off the man like heat off summer asphalt. He just said what was true. That's no home training. The man looked at the boy for a long, still moment. Everyone braced.
The nearby adults were already doing the math, calculating the fastest, most polite route to physically remove this child from his own mouth. The food cart vendor had taken a very quiet step behind his cart, which, let's be honest, was not going to protect him from anything. But the man wasn't angry. That was the strange thing. He was studying the boy. The way you study something you've been looking for and had almost given up on finding. His voice, when it came, was low, measured, the kind of voice that doesn't need volume to fill a room. "You're right." Marcus blinked. The man turned to the elderly woman who had pressed herself against a pillar, grocery bag clutched to her chest, and said calmly and clearly, "I apologize, ma'am. That was careless of me." The woman looked at the man, looked at Marcus, pulled her bag tighter and said very softly, "That's quite all right, dear," in the tone of someone whose only goal was to be somewhere else. The man looked back at Marcus. "Better?" he said. Marcus considered this with the full weight of a very small judge. "Better," he confirmed, and put a chestnut in his mouth. The man held his gaze 1 second longer. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile, the ghost of the idea of one, and he walked away. The crowd exhaled. The teenagers looked at each other with the expression that means, "Did that actually just happen?" The vendor emerged from behind his cart, and Marcus Cole ate another chestnut and went to find the good apple stall. He had no idea. He had absolutely no idea what had just started. His name, if you asked the right people or the wrong ones, depending on who you were, was James Mercer. In certain rooms in New York and Chicago, he was referred to as simply Mr. Mercer, with a pause before the name that told you the speaker was choosing their words. In a glass office on the 42nd floor of a downtown Seattle high-rise, his name appeared on documents as James A. Mercer, Principal Director, head of Mercer Group Holdings, a private investment firm with its hands, in varying degrees of visibility, across real estate, logistics, technology, and half a dozen other industries. He was 41 years old. He had no family. Not because family was impossible, but because a door had closed somewhere in the story of his life. And James Mercer had handled that closed door the only way he knew how, by filling every other room in the house with work until the door disappeared. He was not a cruel man. That matters and needs to be said clearly. He was a hard man. There's a difference. Hard men are forged, pressed by heat and weight into something dense and unyielding. Cruelty is a choice. Hardness is usually a wound that healed wrong. People feared James Mercer because when he wanted something done, it was done. When he decided something was finished, it was finished. In the world he moved through, his word didn't just carry weight, it was final. Not threatening, just final. But here's what none of those boardroom people would ever have believed. The next Saturday morning, he came back to the market. Same time, same hands-in-pockets walk, same unreadable face. And Marcus Cole was exactly where he always was, at the chestnut cart. Because on Saturday mornings, while Grace was at her shift, Mrs. Patterson from downstairs brought Marcus to Pike Place at 9:30, sat at the coffee place across the way, and let Marcus do what Marcus always did. Moved through the stalls like a small, opinionated journalist, interrogated vendors about their products, and ate chestnuts.
Marcus spotted James the moment he arrived. "You came back," Marcus said. "I shop here," James said. Marcus looked around pointedly. No bag, no produce, nothing. "You're not shopping, you're just walking." "I'm about to shop."
Where's your bag?
A pause.
I'll carry things.
Marcus looked at him with the deep skepticism of someone who has heard many inadequate answers. My mom says you should always bring a bag. Plastic is bad for the ocean. Also, you forget things when you don't have a list. James stared at him for a beat. Your mother sounds practical, he said. She's really smart, Marcus confirmed. You want a chestnut? There was the smallest hesitation. And then James Mercer, who sat across from CEOs and said nothing for long, comfortable minutes, reached out and took a chestnut from the paper bag of an 8-year-old boy he had met 6 days ago. The chestnut vendor, watching from 2 feet away, had the look of a man witnessing something he could not explain. And honestly, he wasn't wrong to feel that way. The third Saturday, the man came with a bag. Marcus noticed immediately. He nodded once, slowly, with clear approval. Good, that's better home training. I'm learning, James said. I'm Marcus, Marcus said. I told you that last time, but you didn't say your name back, which is also no home training, by the way. James Mercer. James Mercer, Marcus tried it out. That sounds like a name from a movie. Does it? A serious one, not a funny one. What kind of movie are you from? James asked. He considered this with genuine effort. An adventure one, with a dog and probably a boat. Why a boat? Because I'm going to be a marine biologist. He said it the way people state gravity. They walked the market for 20 minutes. James bought vegetables he didn't need and coffee he didn't finish, while Marcus delivered a full, detailed presentation, entirely unrequested, on the feeding habits of the giant Pacific octopus, which he had recently encountered at the Seattle Aquarium, and which had, in his words, changed everything. James listened. Not politely, not performatively, actually listened. Like the kind of attention that meant his eyes didn't drift, he didn't check his phone, he didn't prep his next response while Marcus was still mid-sentence. He listened like every word mattered, because it did, though James wasn't ready to say why yet. When Mrs. Patterson arrived to collect Marcus, she looked at the man standing beside him, and her body did what everyone's body did. It went still. She took Marcus firmly by the hand, thanked the man in a careful, calibrated voice, and walked. James watched them go. He stood in the middle of the market holding a paper bag with 3 onions and a bunch of kale he would never cook, looking at the back of a small boy in a too big blue jacket disappearing into the crowd. And something in his chest, something that had been sealed and locked and undisturbed for years, made a sound. Small, almost nothing. Like a lock beginning to turn.
Grace Cole got home from the Henderson house at 8:45 on a Thursday night, carrying the specific smell of antiseptic and lavender and exhaustion. Marcus was at the kitchen table in his pajamas doing homework with surgeon-level focus, tongue slightly out, pencil gripped with both purpose and catastrophic form. She changed her shoes, washed her hands, kissed the top of his head. How was school? Good. We learned about volcanoes. Did you know the Pacific Ocean has a whole ring of them? It's called the Ring of Fire. It sounds scary, but it's actually really interesting. That is interesting, she said, opening the fridge. Also, Marcus said in a slightly different voice, the voice he used when he was trying to seem casual about something he wasn't casual about. James came back to the market again on Saturday. Grace paused at the refrigerator. James? James Mercer. The man I told you about, the one with no home training, who I corrected, and he apologized to the old lady. Grace set down what she was holding and turned to face her son. Baby, how many times has this man come to the market? 3 times. He read her face with that alarming accuracy and added, but it's fine, Mom, he's not weird, he listens, like actually listens. He brought his own bag the 3rd time. Because you told him to. Because he has home training now. I'm helping. Grace sat down at the table across from her son and looked at his face, that open, serious, freckled face, and felt the particular combination of love and low-grade terror that children produce in you on a regular basis.
Marcus. You know you're not supposed to talk to strangers at the market. He's not a stranger. I know his name. Knowing a name doesn't make someone not a stranger. Marcus considered this. Mrs. Patterson was there the whole time. She's 73 and 5'1". She's very capable, though. Grace almost smiled. She held it back. I need you to be careful. When I'm at work, I need to know you're safe. I'm safe, Mom, Marcus said, with the complete certainty of someone who has never considered any other possibility. He's safe, Mom, I can tell. Grace looked at her son for a long moment. What does he look like? She asked. Tall, dark coat, serious looking, like he doesn't smile a lot. But he listened to my whole thing about the giant Pacific octopus without interrupting even once. That's a low bar. You'd be surprised, Marcus said. Which Grace thought was probably true. She made him finish his homework and sent him to bed. Then she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea, alone in the quiet, and turned the image over her mind. A man in a dark coat, coming back, week after week, for her son. Not asking for anything, not pushing, just showing up. Something about it tugged at her, some low, instinctive frequency she couldn't name. She told herself it was just exhaustion, just paranoia, just a working single mother's constantly calibrated threat assessment. She was right that she was exhausted, but it wasn't paranoia. Something was already in motion. She just didn't have the words for it yet. Stop. Before we go any further, there's something you need to understand about James Mercer, because everything that's coming is going to mean something entirely different once you know what he was carrying. 11 years ago, James Mercer was a different man. Not a villain, not someone who did terrible things. Different in the way of before and after, like a tree before and after lightning. Same tree, but the lightning happened, and the tree grew differently afterward, and the shape of everything that came after was determined by that one night of fire.
11 years ago, James was 30, a junior analyst at a mid-size firm. Working 70-hour weeks, the kind of ambition that feels like hunger because there's nothing else filling the space. He had an apartment in Capitol Hill, a car he never drove, and a relationship he was too busy to protect. Her name was Sarah Lynn Holloway, 28. She worked for a nonprofit providing legal aid to families in the foster system. Dark hair, green eyes, a laugh that made you want to keep saying things just to hear it. James loved her in a way he didn't have the vocabulary for, and he was terrified of it. Terrified the way people are when love is something they've never been taught to trust. James's father had left when he was 6. Not dramatically, not violently, just gone. One day there, next day not. His mother had done everything she could, but something about that leaving had calcified inside James like sediment at the river bottom. Something that said, hold it at arm's length before it can be taken. He was 30, she was 28. On a Tuesday evening in October, city lights coming through the apartment window, she told him she was pregnant. James went very still. And then he said the wrong things. Not cruel things, he was not a cruel man, but the wrong things. Things about timing and the situation and what this would mean. He watched the light change in her eyes while he was still talking, knew he was doing something irreparable, and kept talking anyway because he didn't know how to stop. She left 3 months later, not because she stopped loving him, but because she loved herself and the child she was carrying, more than she loved the possibility of a man who might someday be brave enough to choose them. James let her leave. That was the lightning. He threw himself into work with the ferocity of a man running from something he can't outrun. He built, he accumulated. He became the version of himself that rooms went silent for. He filled every hour with purpose so there was no room left for the thing he'd lost. But he never forgot. He heard, years later, through a mutual friend, that she'd had a boy, that she'd moved to Seattle, that she'd changed her name, taken her middle name, Grace, something that was just hers, that she had built a life, a real one, a family of 2. He moved to Seattle for business.
At least that was what he told himself. He said it so many times, so convincingly, that most days he believed it. But sometimes, late at night, in the apartment with too many rooms and not enough sound in them, he would think, what if I just saw him once, just to know he's okay? He never planned it, he was too controlled for that. But then one Saturday morning, he walked through Pike Place not looking, not expecting a single thing, and a small boy in a too big blue jacket looked up at him with those green eyes, his mother's eyes, and told him he had no home training. James Mercer had found his son, and his son had found him first. Marcus knew none of this. He knew James Mercer as the serious man who actually listened, the man who, on the fourth Saturday, showed up with 2 coffees and handed one to Mrs. Patterson, who received it with an expression that went from startled to quietly moved in about 3 seconds. He knew James Mercer as the man who, when asked what he did for work, said, "I manage things," and when pressed, said, "Money mostly," and when Marcus said, "That sounds boring," he paused and said almost to himself, "Yes, sometimes it really is." He knew James as the man who, on the 5th Saturday, crouched down beside a street photographer's display of Pacific Northwest wildlife, pointed to a photograph of an orca and said, "Tell me about this one." Marcus talked for 12 straight minutes. James listened for all 12. He asked 3 follow-up questions, specific ones. Marcus decided formally and permanently that James Mercer was excellent. But here's what was happening beneath the surface. James wasn't just listening, he was watching, cataloging. Every expression, every gesture, every impulsive piece of moral logic, looking for pieces of himself in the boy, and finding them in the places he didn't expect. Not in the loudness, not in the opinions, but in the stillness underneath. In the way Marcus would stop talking mid-sentence and look at something for 3 full seconds before he decided what it meant. That was James. That had always been James. He had taught no one that, and yet here it was, walking around in a blue jacket, eating chestnuts. James was absolutely terrified, and he had never in his life wanted anything more. The 6th Saturday cracked something open. It started normally, chestnuts, walking, Marcus explaining, with some frustration, that most people fundamentally misunderstood the difference between dolphins and porpoises, and that this said something concerning about our education system. Then Marcus stopped, in front of a flower stall. He was looking at a small bunch of yellow tulips. "My mom's birthday is next week," he said. "She really likes yellow flowers." "Does she?" "Yeah." A pause, the expression of someone doing arithmetic they can't make come out right. "I have $6.40. James looked at the tulips, then at the boy. "How much are they?" he asked the vendor. $8. Marcus's face did the math. "I'm $1.60 short." He stood there with the specific dignity of a child who will not ask for help, but is deeply, sincerely hoping the universe will intervene. James reached into his pocket. "No," Marcus said immediately. James stopped. "I don't take money from people I'm not related to. My mom taught me that." "Marcus, it's $1.60. That's not the point. No home training is when you don't teach your kids about not taking money from people you don't know. My mom has excellent home training." There was a silence. James put the money away. They stood there in front of the tulips. "What if," James said carefully, "I bought the flowers for your mother's birthday as a gift? You don't know my mom. I know you know her. That's close enough." Marcus thought about this for a full, uninterrupted minute, genuine ethical deliberation. "You'd have to give them to me to give to her, because she doesn't know you, and a strange man showing up with flowers is also no home training." "Agreed," James said immediately. James paid the vendor, handed the tulips to Marcus, who took them in both hands like something that mattered. "Thank you, James." James Mercer, who sat in boardrooms where silence meant fear, nodded once at an 8-year-old boy. and his throat was unexpectedly, inconveniently tight. He kept his face still. He'd had 41 years of practice at keeping his face still, but his chest was doing something he had not authorized it to do. He bought flowers for a woman who didn't know they were from him, for the mother of his son, and all he could do was hand them to a boy and walk away. Some men carry their mistakes in their wallets. James Mercer carried them in his chest. It was the 7th Saturday that something happened that Marcus wouldn't fully understand until much later. They were walking past the main fish stalls, Marcus mid-explanation of Pacific salmon migration, James listening with his full attention, when a man stepped out of a side entrance between two vendor tents. He was well-dressed, broad, maybe 50, the kind of man who carried his own gravity. He saw James and went completely white. Not startled, not surprised, white, the color that comes when the body gets ahead of the mind. He straightened immediately, adjusted his jacket, and said, too quickly, too formally, "Mr. Mercer, I didn't know you. I wasn't aware you came to this." "Henderson," James said, and that was it. One word. The man stopped talking as if the word had physically interrupted him. He nodded twice, quickly, and walked in the opposite direction at a pace that was not quite running. Marcus watched him go, watched James, watched the vendor near them suddenly find something very important to stare at on his own display table.
"Who was that?" Marcus asked. "Someone I know," James said. "He looked scared." James said nothing. "Did you do something to him?" "No." Marcus thought about this. Why was he scared then? "Some people are scared of things they haven't done wrong yet," James said, and Marcus filed this away in the large mental folder labeled, "James says things that don't make sense right away but probably do later." What Marcus didn't know, what he had no way of knowing, was that the man in the good jacket was someone who owed James Mercer a very significant amount of money and had been avoiding the conversation for 6 weeks. The man would have his conversation, but not here, not in front of the boy. That, too, was something about James Mercer. Then there was the day with the fruit vendor. Marcus had been coming to this particular stall, run by a man named Ray, 60 years old, built like he'd been carved out of something solid, for 2 years. Ray called Marcus Professor and always saved him the best plums. On the 8th Saturday, James walked past with Marcus, and Ray looked up. The effect was immediate. Ray was not a small man. He'd grown up in a neighborhood that didn't produce easily impressed people. He had a face that had seen most things. But when he saw James Mercer, he straightened his back, put down what he was holding, and said, "Mr. Mercer," in a voice that had gone very, very professional. Marcus looked between them. "You know Ray. We've met," James said. Ray smiled at Marcus, that warm, normal smile, but his hands had gone still on the counter in the careful way of a man who wants to make no sudden movements. Later, after James had moved ahead to look at something, Ray leaned down to Marcus and said quietly, "You be good to that man, Professor." Marcus frowned. "I'm always good." "I know," Ray said. "I mean, just be good to him." Marcus didn't know what that meant. But we do, don't we? By the 9th Saturday, Grace had started tracking the James mentions at home the way he tracks certain weather systems, not panicked but watchful. "James said this, James did that. James listened to my whole whale migration presentation, Mom, the whole thing." She had stopped telling Marcus to be careful, not because she wasn't, but because every single account Marcus gave her was so consistent, so specific, and so quietly moving that she couldn't locate the threat. A man who brought his own bag because her 8-year-old told him to. A man who listened for 45 minutes about orcas. A man who bought birthday tulips and handed them to a child to protect protocol. The tulips, for the record, had been beautiful. She'd put them in the window where they caught the morning light. She thought about them more than made sense, though she couldn't say why. On the 9th Saturday, Mrs. Patterson twisted her ankle on the stairs. She was fine, loudly and repeatedly fine, while being fussed over on the second-floor landing, but she couldn't take Marcus to the market, and Marcus's face of the prospect of missing Market Saturday had the particular devastation of a child who treats a routine like a religion. Grace had no shift until 2. She took him herself. She was watching Marcus interrogate a vendor about sustainable fishing practices. He was 8, the vendor was 47, and the vendor was losing. When she saw the man arrive, dark coat, hands in pockets, she noticed the crowd before she noticed him, the way it adjusted, the small unconscious acts of making room, the voices that dropped half a register as he passed. She had spent 8 years reading hospital rooms, reading how bodies move around power and danger and authority. She knew what she was seeing. This was a man that people were careful around. Then her son's head came up. "James!" Pure, uncomplicated delight. The voice Marcus used for exactly 3 things: ocean animals, his birthday, and apparently this man. He jogged toward him. Grace watched the man's face as Marcus approached. She expected the polite, neutral expression that adults give children who aren't theirs, the managed smile, the performance of being pleased. Instead, something moved in his face, Not dramatically, it wasn't a gasp, wasn't a breaking, but something unlocked briefly and completely. Something surfaced in those deep eyes that had no business being there if this man was simply a stranger who'd been nice to her kid at the market. He looks at Marcus, Grace thought, like someone who has been waiting. And then Marcus turned. James, this is my mom. Mom, this is James. The man looked up. Their eyes met, and Grace Cole felt the ground move, because she had green eyes, and so did he, and she was looking at a face she had not seen in 9 years. Older now, harder, more fully herself, but the same face, the same jaw, the same careful gravity she had fallen in love with in a different life, in a different city, when she was still someone else's version of herself. James, her James.
The man who had sat very still in an October apartment while she told him she was pregnant and said all the wrong things and let her leave. The father of her son. He was standing 10 feet away from her, looking at her with an expression that was the most controlled thing she had ever seen. And behind the control, behind all that armored stillness, was something she recognized. Fear. He had always been afraid. He was still afraid. The air between them was a living thing. Marcus, with his unnerving social radar, looked between them. "Do you guys know each other?" 2 seconds of silence. "We've met," Grace said. "Small world," James said. "Seattle has a population of around 750,000, Marcus said thoughtfully, so it's actually not that small." Neither adult responded. Marcus sensed, accurately, that the adults needed something he could not provide. "I'm going to look at the crabs," he announced, and walked 11 feet to the fish display, pressing his face against the glass with focused interest, giving them the loudest possible version of privacy. They stood facing each other for the first time in 9 years. "How long have you known?" Grace asked. Her voice was quiet and controlled, the voice she used in the hospital when she needed to not fall apart in front of someone who needed her. "The first day," James said. She closed her eyes, a half second. "James, I know. You sat with my son for 9 Saturdays. Our son." Her eyes opened. The words sat between them like something lit. James didn't flinch from it, didn't qualify it. He said it the way someone says the first honest thing they've said out loud in a long time. "I wasn't going to tell him without your permission," he said. "I was never going to do that. I needed to see him. I needed to know he was okay. And what if I hadn't come today? What if Mrs. Patterson hadn't twisted her ankle? Were you just going to come back every Saturday forever and say nothing?" A pause. "I don't know," he said. And that honesty, the rawness of it, from a man that rooms fell silent for, hit her harder than any polished answer would have. "He's okay," Grace said, softer. "He's more than okay." "I know," James said. "I know. That's you. You did that." "He did that," Grace said. "He came out like this." "He told me I had no home training," James said. "The first thing he ever said to me. He tells everyone that. He was right." Grace looked at this man, this hard, controlled, now slightly undone man, and felt 9 years of things she didn't have time to feel right now pressing against the inside of her chest like water against a door. "What do you want, James?" she asked. "Right now, in this market, be honest with me." He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that the fish vendor near them pretended to be deeply interested in his own inventory. "I don't know how to do this," James finally said. "I don't know what I'm asking for. I'm not here to take anything. I know I have no right to walk back into his life and act like I was ever part of it. I know exactly what I chose." He looked at her directly. "But I sat next to him for 9 Saturdays, he said, "and I think he might be the best person I have ever met. And I helped make that, even if only technically, and I don't know what to do with that." Grace said nothing. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know it's just a word. I know it doesn't cover what it needs to cover." "It's a start," she said. "Is it enough to be a start?" "I don't know yet," she said. It was the most honest thing either of them had said in 9 years. They waited 2 weeks. In those 2 weeks, Grace and James met twice for coffee without Marcus. The first time was stiff and formal, like a negotiation with the stakes unlabeled. The second was slightly more like 2 people in the same room, and slightly less like representatives of opposing countries. They talked about Marcus, about what he knew, what he didn't know, how children absorb hard truths, whether to involve a counselor. Grace had read 3 articles on the subject. James had read 7. "Of course you did," Grace said, and something in the air loosened just slightly. They talked about themselves too, carefully,
The way you move through a room where things were broken and not everything has been swept up yet. James apologized again, with specifics this time. He named the night, the conversation, the exact things he should not have said. He didn't look away while he said it. Grace listened without interrupting, which cost her something real, and then told him the truth about the years. Not to wound him, but because he'd asked, and because he needed to understand what his absence had looked like from inside it. He sat with that. He didn't flinch, didn't redirect, didn't call it something easier. He just sat with it. The 30-year-old James would have found a way to make it mean something else. This James didn't. "I can't fix the past," he said. "I know," Grace said. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" "I don't know yet. But Marcus deserves the truth. The truth comes first. Everything else gets figured out after."
They told him on a Sunday afternoon at Grace's kitchen table, with a plate of chocolate chip cookies that Grace had made because she didn't know what else to do with her hands. James sat across from Marcus. Grace sat beside her son. Marcus looked at James, looked at his mother, looked at James again. He was quiet for a long time, longer than Marcus was usually quiet about anything. Then he said, "You're my bad." Not a question, a statement. Because Marcus Cole had, of course he had, already put it together, probably weeks ago. The green eyes, the jaw, the way James looked at him. Marcus had filed it under things the adults will explain eventually, and waited. "Yes," James said. "You didn't know about me?" "I knew about you. I made some bad choices when I was younger. I was afraid. And because I was afraid, your mom had to raise you alone. That was wrong. That was my fault." Marcus sought with this. "Are you still afraid?" James looked at his son, at this boy with his mother's eyes and his own face, and a moral compass that pointed truer than anything James had ever built or bought or earned. "Yes," James said, "but I'm trying not to let it make my decisions for me anymore." Marcus took a cookie. Ate half. Thought. "My friend Tyler's dad doesn't come to any of his stuff. School plays, birthdays, nothing," Marcus said. "That's no home training." "Yes." "Are you going to not come to my stuff?" "No." "If you'll let me?" "No." "I want to come to everything. Even the marine biology presentation in May?" "It's 45 minutes. Front row," James said. Marcus studied him for a long, careful moment. Then he picked up the other half of his cookie and handed it to James. "Okay," Marcus said, "but you need more home training first." James took the cookie. "I have a good teacher," he said. Grace, who had been holding herself together through sheer will for the last 10 minutes, made a sound that started as a laugh and became something else entirely. Her hand came up to cover her mouth. Marcus looked at her. He slid off his chair and wrapped both arms around her middle the way he had since he was 4 years old, completely, with his whole body. No reservation. "It's okay, Mom," he said, into her side. He brought his own bag and everything. And Grace Cole laughed. Really laughed. The kind that shakes your whole frame. And held her son. And looked up at the man across the table who was watching them with an expression that had no clean name. Something between grief and wonder. Something too new and too raw to be called happiness yet, but pointed directly at it. Some things don't resolve cleanly. That's not a failure of the story. It's the truth of life. James didn't move in. Grace wasn't in love with him again. Not yet, possibly not ever, and she would not have thanked you for assuming either way. She was a woman who had built a life with her own hands, on her own hours, and that life was hers. It didn't need completing. But it could grow. Carefully, on her terms, in its own time. James came to the marine biology presentation in May, front row, dark coat, looking slightly out of place the way significant people sometimes look in small, ordinary, beautiful rooms. Marcus presented for 47 minutes, 2 over because he had added a last-minute section on whale sharks that he felt was essential. James applauded longer than any other parent. In the hallway after, Marcus introduced him to his teacher, Mrs. Okafor. "This is James, he's a person I know." Mrs. Okafor looked between them with the expression of a third-grade teacher who has genuinely seen everything. Then Marcus said, quietly, like testing something in his own mouth for the first time, "He's my dad. That's what he is." James went very still.
Mrs. Okafor smiled wider. "It's nice to meet you." Marcus had already moved on, already filed it, already made it part of the architecture of the world. James watched him go and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Claimed. That summer, James started taking Marcus to the aquarium. Not every week, never overwhelming. The careful, consistent, showing up kind of presence that builds trust the way water shapes stone, not by force, but by return. Marcus talked. James listened. Then, slowly, James began to talk too. About his work, simplified. Marcus declared investment management marginally more interesting than plate tectonics, which James considered significant progress. He told Marcus small things about growing up, the neighborhood, the fact that he'd been terrified of dogs until age 12, the time he'd attempted to cook an actual meal and activated 3 smoke detectors in sequence. Marcus found the smoke detector story riveting.
"You have no home training in the kitchen," he announced. "I'm aware. I'll teach you. I can make 3 things. 2 of them are good." They cooked on a Saturday in July, in Grace's kitchen, because Grace's kitchen was the center of things, the way mother's kitchens always are. Marcus taught James to make scrambled eggs. He supervised closely. He offered constant, detailed feedback. The eggs were fine, genuinely, objectively fine. Marcus declared them excellent. James ate 2 plates. Grace stood in the doorway watching her son teach his father how to scramble eggs, and felt something settle in her chest that she didn't have a quick word for. Rightness, maybe. Not the rightness of the original plan. The plan was 9 years gone, but a new shape, the shape that forms from the breaking and the rebuilding, and turns out to be stronger in the broken places. She thought about the October night she'd left. She thought about the years between. She thought about a 2-year-old boy looking up at her and saying, "Mama," and her thinking, "I have everything I need. I have enough." She had been right. She was still right. But enough can always grow. "You put too much milk in," Marcus was telling James gravely. "That's why they're watery. I should have supervised from the beginning." "You were right here. I was giving you space to try. That's how home training works. You can't do it for people. You have to let them practice." James looked at him. "When did you get so smart?" Marcus looked genuinely puzzled. "I've always been like this. Ask my mom." "He has," Grace said from the doorway. "See?" Marcus said. It was a Tuesday in October when Marcus said the thing that would stay with James Mercer for the rest of his life. They were at the aquarium. The jellyfish room, Marcus's favorite, despite his stated position that the octopus was objectively superior. The jellyfish are aesthetically correct, he had explained, and James had accepted this. They stood in the blue light, watching the jellyfish pulse through the water like slow, breathing lanterns. James had been quiet for a while. He was often quiet. Marcus had learned to live comfortably inside James's silences, which was something very few people could do. "James," Marcus said. "Yeah? Do you feel bad? About before? About not knowing me?" James looked at the glass. "Yes," he said. "A lot. You shouldn't. Too much? Why not?"
"Because," Marcus said, with the calm authority of someone who has genuinely thought this through, "feeling bad for a long time doesn't fix anything. It just uses up time you could spend doing better. My mom told me that. She said guilt is like carrying a backpack full of rocks. You can look at the rocks, you can know they're there, and then you put the backpack down." James was quiet. "Your mother," he said finally, "is very wise." "I know." A pause. "She kept the tulips, by the way, the yellow ones from her birthday. She put them in the window." "I know, I saw them." Marcus turned to look at him. "James, do you like my mom?" James went very still. "That's a complicated question," he said. "It's not, really." "It is for adults." Marcus thought about this. "My mom is really good," he said. "She works really hard and she writes me a note every day in my lunch. Every day, even when she's tired. She never misses." "I know she's good," James said quietly. "I have always known that." "Then you should tell her," Marcus said simply. "That's also home training, telling people when they're good." James looked at his son in the blue light. This boy. This impossible, specific, once-in-a-lifetime boy who had walked into his life eating chestnuts and pointing a finger and telling a feared man he had no home training and had been completely, devastatingly right. "You're right," James said. "I know," Marcus said. "I usually am." He went back to watching the jellyfish. Then, after a quiet moment, "I call you James because that's your name and that's what I know you as. But I told Tyler at school that you're my dad, so now everyone knows." "Yeah? Is that okay?" James turned back to the glass.
watched a moon jellyfish drift across the deep blue dark. "More than okay," he said. "Good," Marcus said. And then, just like that, no ceremony, no announcement, he reached up and took James's hand. The way children hold the hands of people they have decided to love, completely, without ledger, without condition, without keeping a record of what was owed and what wasn't. James Mercer, 41 years old, standing in the blue light of a jellyfish exhibit in Seattle, felt something break open in him that was not a breaking at all. It was the opposite. It was the sound of a door being opened from the inside. He held his son's hand. The jellyfish drifted. The light was blue and quiet and entirely sufficient. Somewhere, 6 blocks away, in a 2-bedroom apartment with yellow tulips still standing in the window, a woman who had built everything from scratch was coming home from a long shift, taking off her shoes, putting the kettle on, looking at the tulips, thinking about the shape of things. It was not the shape she'd planned. It was better. Some things that break open are not breaking. Some things that fall apart are rearranging. And some doors that close are just waiting for someone brave enough to open them from the other side. Marcus Cole was 22 when his first paper was published. Pacific Northwest Orca Communication Patterns. He dedicated it to his mother, who had never once stopped leaving notes in his lunch, even when lunch became a meal he packed in a university dorm room, and the notes were texts she sent at 6 in the morning. He thanked his father in the acknowledgments, briefly, without decoration, exactly the way James would have wanted.
At the small celebration dinner, a waterfront restaurant, just the 3 of them, Marcus ordered salmon and explained to the waiter, entirely unprompted, the migratory patterns of Pacific salmon. James and Grace sat across from each other. They shared a look. The specific, helpless, deeply fond look of 2 people who have just been mildly embarrassed by someone they love more than makes sense. It was the kind of look that takes years to build, the kind that requires surviving something together, the kind that is its own entire language. "He gets that from you," James said. "He absolutely does not," Grace said. "The explaining things to strangers who did not ask? That is entirely your side." Marcus looked up from his menu. "You're talking about me." "We're not," they said at the same time. Marcus looked at them both. Long, clear, that same gaze, the one that had never once, not once in his life, pretended to see something other than what was there. "You have no home training," he said. And then he smiled. And at the table, James Mercer and Grace Cole laughed, the way you only laugh with people who have seen you at your worst and decided to stay anyway. The way you laugh when a story that had every reason to break you, somehow, against all reasonable odds, made you whole instead. Outside, Puget Sound lay dark and silver under the evening sky. Beneath the water, somewhere in the cold blue dark, the orcas were calling to each other across distances that should have been impossible to cross. They always found each other anyway. Some stories don't begin with love. Some of them begin with a small boy, a paper bag of chestnuts, and 6 words that cut right through a city full of carefully maintained silence. That's no home training. He said it to a powerful man that the whole world was afraid of. He had no idea he was talking to his father. And his father had no idea that the bravest thing he would ever do was come back.
If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that it's never too late to put the backpack of rocks down, never too late to show up, never too late to let someone teach you better, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Some people are still waiting for their father to come back. Some fathers are still standing outside the door. It is not too late. Please like and subscribe for more interesting stories.